All right. How about some more Matrix quotes? Tell me who this was. Maybe they couldn't figure out what to make chicken taste like, which is why chicken tastes like everything. Which character?
No, it was a Cypher. It was the dude with the goatee and bald.
John, paying attention? I didn't hear the character yet. Mouse.
Yeah.
Mouse. All right. All that we are asking in return is your cooperation in bringing a known terrorist to justice. Yes, Agent Smith. That was too easy. John, you got that? Do you need more coins? Here. Okay, we'll do some more after. All right, our next talk. Why don't I have the name of your talk? Oh, it's right there.
You're welcome.
Rise of the Advisor. Neil is currently a threat intelligence engineer working for Threat Quotient. He has been active and advising in the security industry for over 15 years and in technology for 20 plus years. Previous to his current position, he was a technical solution architect for Cisco, and before that, he was a principal security engineer at SourceFire. Please welcome Neil Humphrey.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Well, this is boding well. Oh, there we go. Okay. So apparently I'm supposed to use this for recording purposes, so I apologize. And there it goes again. Maybe it doesn't want me to move. If I go this way? All right, see what happens. Okay. Afternoon all, and I do know that this is getting towards the end of the afternoon, so I'll move through this as quickly as I possibly can while covering some pieces that I think are fairly interesting or fairly relevant for us today. So this is obviously going to be a great talk. Like, we really hope that it works out that way. But first of all, I want to set some ground rules. And if anyone's ever done any form of public speaking or any form of presentations, then you know that things are going to go wrong. Shit's going to happen, right? So we've established some ground rules on how to recover from those. We've also gone through and said that there are some certain golden rules of PowerPoint presentations that everyone must follow. However, I choose to be a rebel. Right? This will not happen. And you'll notice strange things that pop up across the entire thing. And I almost want you to call out, when you see the picture, call out the movie, if you don't mind. So this one, there we go. Okay, so the agenda, first off, and I do not have any, my company basically folded out of SourceFire many years ago. So we have been starting to do squishy rhinos instead of squishy pigs from the snort side. I don't have any with me, but if you find me in the future, I'll give you one. So what are we going to talk about? First off, we've done the introduction. Congratulations, we're done. Then we'll do mandatory fun, we'll go through the problems, and then we'll talk about some other pieces. But again, as is already mentioned, who am I? Right? Most of this is stuff, but the important part for you guys is I like to talk in analogies. Be ready for that, it will happen. And also, I may or may not know what I'm talking about. And that will be for you to decide at the end of the presentation. And I do sincerely hate boring presentations. I'm sick of PowerPoint. So the movie, Thomas Crown Affair, there we go. All right, so quick question. First off, the movie. So let me ask you a quick question. This is a little bit of get to know you before I get an idea on the crowd. And I forget that there's another group of people up there. Anybody above y'all? I see a head. Okay. Anybody who works in the SOC? Who's in a SOC analyst? Anybody? No. Anyone in risk? Maybe. Okay. Anyone in network security, meaning the security engineering, so the plumbing? A couple of people. Any CISOs? The men with, or the women with the pocketbooks, right? No one? Okay. Anyone in, I'm sorry? They They won't admit it. Good, smart people. Anyone in threat intelligence? Not really. Anybody in IR, incident response? Wow, cool. So the reason I'm asking those questions is I want to play a little bit of a game. First off, are you sure about that? You positive about that? SAW, I cheated. The first one is SAW. The second one is War Games. And just because I love that little bastard, I'm doing that to my family over Christmas. So, let's have a quick game. Ow, step on cords. Game, what's the movie? Quiz show. All right, let me get my handy notepad out since I couldn't do exactly what I wanted to do, and we're going to go low tech. Okay, so here is my question for you guys. And yes, you are seeing some of the slides coming up, but we'll get into that. So, first off, which one do you want to start with? What is intelligence or what isn't intelligence?
What is it?
We have two diametrically different voices at this. Let's do isn't. Isn't. Okay, so what isn't intelligence? Anyone have a guess? Start off with anybody. Raw logs? Okay, we'll call that one. That's fine. Actually, you got number one on that one. Large amounts of atomic indicators. Lots of IP addresses, lots of domains, lots of noise that pops up. Same thing as your logs that you get in your SIMs, right? All right, next guess. What is not intelligence?
Activity observation.
Activity observation. Okay, we'll give you that one. External risk scores. I believe that this person has been hacked. Well, you've probably been hacked. So what do you have to say about that? Right. Up next, next choice. Anybody? I'll give you a hint. One of the vendors out front is going to be fairly pissed off by this one. No one. Cool. Sorry?
Anti-X.
Anti-X. No. Nope. Adversarial cartoons. Right? Putting together that this is an adversary. Adversary profiling is hard. It is not truly threat intelligence. It's a dossier that's put together by a particular group with a particular opinion and a particular bias. And generally they try to talk about it based upon a cartoon associated to that one. And it's gone again. And it's back. So 4, and this one will get me in hot water based on my current employer. Sharing groups. Why would I pick on sharing groups? So the ISACs are some of the communities. Very good collections of information. But if you notice, I refer to them as Facebook. Right? Herd mentality, echo chamber, right? This is the only thing that's important to us because everyone else in our industry is saying that this is important. Yeah, you might want to take the blinders off. Right? Fair statements? Am I going to get fired for that one? It's a chance. Hopefully not. So what is intelligence? Visibility. Let me check my notes. Okay, actually I'll give you that one. And that's actually 2 of them, but I had to break them out. Let's start with this one. Everyone familiar with the term tribal knowledge? Right? That's intelligence. What happened before? What happened yesterday? Why does Betty in accounting continually open those damn PDFs? Right? Because it's going to happen. And I'll actually give you the other one, which is a little bit harder, but I think is part of this one. It's part of visibility. It is market understanding. Intelligence isn't internal or external. It's both. Right? Being able to understand what may be happening external to your environment in the greater world or in the greater ecosystem versus what's actually happened or could happen or has happened in your past. Any other questions or any other guesses on 1 or on 4? I'll give you a hint. I'm sorry?
Actionable information.
Focused and timely external data, actionable information, and also so that we can move on along. I'll go ahead and open this one because it's tangential. Everyone remember the CSI theme song? We had the Who reference up there before. Who are you, right? Hard evidence. Give me something that I can work off of. Make sure I understand what's going on. Where did it come from? Do I have multiple sources of attribution to it? Or is it just one person's opinion? So let's work off of that as we go through this. So here's the problem. And again, I'll come back to why we had the little game show in a second. But here's the problem that we're dealing with in the market today. First and foremost, that's not a movie. Sorry. But I thought it was great. But here's the problem. Movie? Good people. With my people, they understand this. We have a situation that revolves around organizations. And it's not that an organization is good or an organization is bad, but we'll go back to what we refer to as one form of intelligence, tribal knowledge, right? And in particular, I want to focus in on, and we'll deal with this more, the CISO area in the bottom right-hand corner. Right? The reason I asked, who are you and what are you doing? Are you in incident response? Are you in admin access? Are you in risk management? Are you in threat intel? Are you in SOC? Are you in security engineering? Each one of these are separate groups that have different meanings, different reasons for being. They have a different goal in mind, which leads us to the effect of that problem, which is silos. And I am not going to beat silos to death. Everyone's heard that this problem is in silos. This group has this group has that group. Everyone talks, everyone communicates. But I do want to show a couple pictures of silos because I think they're kind of cool, and in particular, the one that no one expects, right? But what we end up with, in general, in talking about silos and the problem, and this is endemic, silos are inflexible. If they do flex or they do bend a little bit, they tend to do what that one on the side does, right? Which is just flat ass break. And that's not what we need to have from an organizational perspective. The other problem, or the other piece of this problem that we'll talk about, people are people, right? And none of us have ever done this. Fletch, good. Has anyone ever done this before? Come on, guys. Someone's been around somebody drunk and you drew something on them. I mean, let's admit it. Just go ahead. You're not going to be persecuted, right? But also, none of us have either done this, right? Even to our spouses, to our families, to our friends, right? But the point is that we've become very much attenuated into those silos where we're paying attention to what matters to me. I have metrics. I have deliverables. There are things that I have to do. These are my pieces of tribal knowledge. These are my fiefdoms, right? And this is not a problem with organizations. It is a people problem in the way that we address ourselves today, right? And the reason why, again, I call the sharing groups Facebook. Right? This is the situation that we have to deal with. So now the other people problem. Not a movie, but Ross Perot, who played by? There you go. So why do I have Ross Perot up here? Negative unemployment, the giant sucking sound. Right? Anyone remember that one from Ross Perot? This is the other people problem. We have an issue in organizations and in intelligence where we hire someone, they work for us for 6 months, 9 months, a year and a half. Actually, let me ask this question. Again, this is not part of the presentation, but just for my own edification. Who's been in their current role more than 2 years? Wow, that is different than I expected, right? By the way, you could go get another job fairly quickly, just so that you're aware, right? If you are a cybersecurity professional with any kind of skill set, you already have a job and multiple offers on the table. As someone mentioned, CISOs are sitting down and hiding. This is the reason why, right? They're not getting more budget, but people are getting hired from underneath them. And then finally, from a company that I have questions about, and I want to focus in on this one. When businesses can't find people within cybersecurity experience, they make easy targets because they simply don't have the right solutions, policies, or procedures in place. I think this is, quite frankly, the most interesting quote I've ever seen in cybersecurity. What's not on here? Detection mechanisms, the right EDR, the right this, the right that, right? It's policies, it's procedures, and it's solutions. Now, those of you that don't know me, which is basically everyone here, I love military history. I'm a military history guy. I went to a military college. It's in my blood. So if you guys will let me entertain you for a little bit, I want to walk you through a quick case study that I think is applicable to what we're talking about. And I'm not even going to ask if anyone recognizes this tank, but this is a World War II relic that was specifically found and is now in a war museum outside of Dulles Airport Base, or Airport Base, airport, blah, right? It is specifically a jumbo Sherman. It weighs 37 tons. It's got a V8 engine associated to it. It runs on gasoline, which may or may not be a problem, but it's got a 75mm tank destroyer cannon associated to that one. Why am I talking about that particular tank? We'll come back to it. Anyone familiar with that acronym in the military history? Give you an idea of the time frame we're talking about. The Sherman should be a hint. World War II, Eisenhower, that is correct. Which is what we have here. And in particular, the story we're going to talk about revolves around the 21st Army Group as led by Omar Bradley, which we have, actually, I'm sorry, in this case, this is from early September, where the 1st Army is actually, this is around D-Day, post-D-Day organization of the U.S. Army in World War II. And we're going to talk about the 1st Army under Bradley and how that moved. So this is from September the 1st, 1944. And if you'll notice, we have a completely different organization across the middle here. Omar Bradley transferred over. He's still head of in this case, the 21st Army Group, but he is in charge of the Central Group of Armies. If you notice on the left-hand side, actually on the right-hand side, I apologize, you have the Northern Group of Armies as led by Bernard Montgomery. Right? So this means that Omar Bradley was in charge of the Central and Southern campaigns against France and moving through the Ardennes. And in particular, he had a little guy underneath his command by the name of General George S. Patton in the 3rd Army Group. Also known as this guy. Come on, wiki wiki. Not this guy, right? But the story took a little twist for me. So a couple days ago, I was doing more prep work on this and was doing more digging into the history around this particular story. And I ran into something that I thought was incredibly interesting and very, very poignant for this, which is this guy. And we'll talk more about them in the first place. But anyone recognize him? Chances are going to be very, very slim. If you do, you know military history better than I do. Nope? Good. You'll have to listen because he gets bigger. So, walk this through very quickly. December 18th, 1944, we have the organization of the 12th Army Group. Sorry, dyslexia, got it confused. 12th versus 21st. Under Bradley, there's the 3rd Army, the 1st Army, the 9th, and the 15th. And this is specifically talking, and that does not render very well at all. It's going to be fun. December the 18th, 1944. Anyone have any idea what in particular happened in late December 1944 that would involve these areas during World War II? Battle of the Bulge. Very good. Makes this a lot easier. So we're going to talk about this. In the circle is Bastogne. Red line is the front line of the group, and the top red line across the north is the breakup between the 12th Army Group and the Northern Army Group underneath Bernard Montgomery. Blue line is the dividing line and territorial between the 3rd Army Group and their area of organization and what they had to do. And again, everything was pretty much under the 9th Army is where Bastogne was, which we can zoom in on here. I don't know why I did that, but it felt right at the time. Right? So why did I bring this up? It's actually for this. Everyone, you have a G organization and you have an S organization. G meaning general staff, S meaning staff. And each one is responsible for particular areas of expertise or areas of effectively organization. So in this case, at this point in time, General Patton's XO was the Deputy Chief of Staff, which is General Gay, and he had, of course, a Deputy Chief of Staff, which is Colonel, what's his name? Colonel Harkins. If you notice, we have Colonel Capanola, who's in charge of plans. I've got a Colonel Matthews, who's in charge of personnel, a Colonel Maddox in charge of operations and training, and then I have a Colonel Mueller, who's in charge of supply, construction, transportation, and evacuation. One guy in particular is in charge of military intelligence. Guy's now the name of Colonel Koch, and I'm probably mispronouncing that. Now, why do I talk about him? Well, on December 25th, this was the current situation of what was going on. Bastogne and the 101st Airborne had been completely encircled. The Germans were running out of steam in the Ardennes offensive in this area here. But then, this guy knew something. So Coach knew that the purpose of intelligence was to assist the commander in accomplishing his mission and to protect the command for surprise. Why is he important, and why is this a good case study? Back on December the 9th, in 1944, there was a 12th Army Group meeting, and actually it ended up going up to Shave, where there was lots of rumblings about a potential German invasion or German counteroffensive that was going to occur through the Ardennes. And one guy in particular had done enough work on his own of looking internally and planning and working with his G3, but also externally and looking at aircraft photos and capture signals and everything along those lines to say, I really think something bad's going to happen. So I've already gone ahead and put together contingency plans that allow maneuvers and activities to occur in case the entire Third Army has to pivot, lose the front line, and move north, which, surprisingly, is exactly what happened. On December 27th, the encirclement of Bastogne is broken. In particular, it's broken by this group right here, which is the 4th Armored Division associated with the 3rd Army Group underneath Patton. Following the commands of Patton, but the tactical planning and the operations that then later General Koch had put in place and had ready to present to someone back on December the 9th. I can't come up with a better example of being prepared versus being reactive than this particular scenario. Now, the other thing I want you to take from this is, again, the 4th Armored Group. And in particular, 4th Armored as it equates to a tank that may have gotten right there firstest with the mostest. That tank was called, doesn't show it. Drop that one. It's called Cobra King. This tank was actually damaged 2 or 3 weeks after the Battle of Bastogne, and it was crewed by Charles Bogans, Corporal Milton Deckerman, and Privates James C. Murphy, Hubert Smith, and a Harold Hafner, who were all sitting on top of that tank right outside of Bastogne as soon as they got in. As I mentioned, it was damaged shortly thereafter, and then recovered, repaired, put back into place, and then forgotten about until it ended up as a trophy or memorial in front of several U.S. Army bases in Germany across the Cold War. Then it was brought back and put in place once it was identified as being the Cobra tank or Cobra King tank, and was found and reconditioned and was recently placed in that museum. I'll come back to the reason on that one. So to go back to our problem one more time. Movie? Aliens, all right. Here's our problem. It's our fault. This is all our fault. So in particular, one thing I want to point out that I find personally hilarious, again, I work for a vendor. I'm allowed to call this out as this is all our fault, but my company is actually on this piece somewhere twice. Like I'm in here, and then I think we're like over here somehow or another. I don't know why, right? But the reason I bring this up and the reason I say this is our fault and how it applies into what we're talking about is we've all been very, very reactive. We have not been anticipatory. And I'm not a big fan of talking about security in the vein of I'm going to be reactive to something, or I want to be anticipatory, or I want to be ahead of the next major thing. Because I don't really think that you can. Sorry, I don't. Like that's my personal vendor stance. I think you can be prepared, but I don't think you can be anticipatory and be very, very specific in what's going on. Also, part of the reason for this is because we're all asking and looking at our own phones and our own echo chambers. We're in our own silos that I need something that works for me. It's not working for the organization. It's not working for the greater security architecture. It's what will work for me. And that's how we end up with all these different things that do half of the same thing that the other one does, kind of, sort of, maybe. And we all use the same words, and no one knows why the world's actually spinning, right? That's my personal vendetta against vendors. And I honestly don't remember the name of this movie. Anyone know the one I'm talking about? Is it The Interview? The one that was never actually released, but was, right? So the symptoms of the problem. We have too much data. Fairly simple to explain, no real questions. We don't have enough people. Again, fairly simple to explain. We've already talked about that. We don't have enough time. No one has enough time. Never have. And we are in an analytical paralysis. If I hear my VP of sales or someone else go through and say that I'm hunting for a needle in a pile of needles in another sales presentation, again, I'm going to discuss the concept of an electromagnet that's very powerful and just cleans all of them up, right? But the point is that we're all talking about this, and well, this is my problem, this is their problem, and we have to figure out how we're going to analyze or deal with that particular thing. So every symptom has a diagnosis, right? Whether it's right or whether it's wrong, it must be diagnosed. So why are we seeing these symptoms? Again, because people are being people. Teams are talking, but they're not communicating. This is what's going on here, this is what's going on there. We don't have a lot of cross-team communication, or if we do, it's a little bit more forced than it really ought to be. This is the big one, and this will lead into the actual discussion of the topic or the title of the presentation. CISOs are strategic. CISOs are Patton. They're not Colonel Koch. They're not the commander of the 4th Army, or 4th Armored, excuse me, right? They are, voice is gone. You can look at it and say that Eisenhower is the CEO, whereas Omar Bradley was the CIO if the CISO actually reports to them. But the CISO is Patton. And the CISO has a very strategic goal, which is to defend the network. That's it. That's their job. That's what they do. Team leads are team tactical. Meaning if I have a team lead, or if I have a SOC level 3 analyst, or if I have someone who is my principal architect in security engineering, whatever that may be, their job is to validate from all those vendors we were just talking about what makes the most sense and what works for the company based upon the best price that they can get. Not, is it going to do a better good across multiple teams, but only for the team that has the budget that's been assigned to them at that period of time. Analysts are keyboard tactical. What do I mean by that? Meaning that they're dealing with that alert, they're dealing with that event, they're dealing with that artifact, they're dealing with that malware file, they're dealing with this incident. They're not necessarily, and they do a good job usually of doing cross keyboard, of helping the guy out beside them or the girl out beside them or the person in the next room, but they're not necessarily being able to overtly communicate what they're doing and why it was valuable or what they found interesting that day. Again, it's tribal knowledge and it goes up in their head, and maybe it be spread across a couple of keyboards in the near vicinity, usually due to them cursing, throwing something, or putting a Post-it note up. The treatment. We need to be able to execute and validate the strategic vision as set by the CISO across the teams. And the CISO's job is to make sure that we do that, but we can help them out a little bit. We need to provide cross-team tactical guidance and review. We need something that's able to bridge those silos, and not a technology, not another way of communicating, but we need a human potentially that may be able to walk across the teams that is mutually respected and is able to understand what's going on. We also need to be able to do metrics. Again, it's a little military based, but we want to be able to do AARs, or after action reports. What did you do? What did you find? How did you find it? How did you mitigate it? Did you not mitigate it? What tool did you use? How long did it take you to use the tool? Right? We need to start gathering more detail in that manner. And quite frankly, we need a historian. Somebody needs to be able to be in charge of, you haven't sent that in. I need that piece of information. I need that data associated to that. And then finally, tribal knowledge. Well, and then we'll leave the other one for another joke. But someone, the historian is actually in charge of capturing the tribal knowledge. And again, the reason why, and I'll go back to the history example. Why would I even bring up Cobra King? Any guesses? How did they know that? Records, serial numbers. As much as we can bang on the military for whatever they want, they take copious notes. Right? They write AARs, or after action reports, on everything that happens. They were able to identify on a Google search very quickly the actual crew members of the tank and what they did that day back on December 27th of 1944. Beyond just simply saying, here's a serial number of this particular tank. This was the story of that tank on that day as written by notes and understood by the historians associated to that one. Am I thinking that industries or our companies need to be able to do the same thing? No. Right? We don't need all of that. But there's a level of information that is internal, intelligence that is internal, that is not being captured and not being processed. In other words, you need to know where the bodies are buried, right? This tool does not do what we thought it was going to do, so why am I dependent upon it? Or this other team knows that it's not doing what we wanted it to do, so I need to be able to try to fix that or figure out a mitigation around that. So, organization good, organization bad. We'll go back to the CISO again. I personally feel that something is missing, right? I have a team lead for each one of these silos, as we've talked about. I have a CISO who's in charge of their strategic vision, their budget, what they've been charged to do. And generally, CISOs are inheriting an architecture that they may or may not understand, or that may or may not want, and don't understand why it was put there in the first place. I've replaced a lot of vendors in my time working as a vendor because of that same reason. CISO comes in, doesn't understand what's going on, rip it out and replace it. Was it working? Don't know. Don't care. Don't trust it. Why? Right? What's missing is a staff. Someone who works for the CISO that is not beholden to a particular team that is in charge of gathering metrics, being an advisor to a bunch of different people or a bunch of different teams, and understands the architecture and the impact at a tactical level. So how do you do that? How do you become an advisor? I really, really hate this one, and I'm sorry, which is the reason why I figure most of you are doing this, right? But we do have to start taking good notes. That's the way that you can start understanding and providing communication. Remembering that this person said that last week is great, but it doesn't communicate for well. Because guess what? People leave. We don't want to let all their work go too. Metrics move things. I don't like this. Why? It does not work with your kids. I'm going to be very clear about that, right? You didn't like this last week. I don't care. I don't like it now. Right? What did I do? I did that one. Advise, don't do. I'm not asking you to walk in and take over someone's job. You don't want to do that. But what you can do is to help them understand what they're doing in the greater goal of things. Help them work with the CISOs towards that strategic vision. But more importantly, and this is the most important thing you can get out of this talk, security suffers from an issue in perception. Right? Security is a cost basis technology. We don't make the company any money, ever. We cost the company money consistently. So we have to be able to start identifying and advertising ourselves on when we do something right and when we find something. So if I can do an advising and help people understand across teams how we've done something really well, guess what? Metrics move things like budgets. Evidence counts. Again, an opinion held by one is an opinion. An opinion held by 4 or 5 could be construed as fact, depending upon how you want to look at that. Evaluate and record those investments. Again, metrics, understand what's going on. We made this investment, did it move the needle or did it not? But how also are you judging the needle being moved? Trending can be prophetic. Anybody in the Mega Millions drawing tonight? Anybody buy tickets? One person in the room. Only one person wants to quit their job on Saturday? Are you out of your mind? Right? Guess what? Trending data says that we will both have to be at work on Monday, right? It's the way that it works. And then finally, some tools to use for this one. I don't expect you to simply sit there and write this stuff down in a notebook. There are free versions of all of these software available, outside of maybe SharePoint, but you can find a pirated version of that somewhere, right? Elastic, Hadoop, even Google Docs if you have access to it. You want the forensic logs. You want the daily SOC logs. I want my IR case notes. I want to be able to collect all of the information I possibly can to understand how I can best use that, again, to advise. Being able to say, hey, why don't you look that up? This other team ran into it last week is very, very different from, well, let me go pull the sample, let me send an email. Let them search for it themselves, right? Be able to be tactical and reactive to the internal team's needs, not doing this. And then, once you start getting that down and you can start communicating effectively, because people are still looking at their phones, but they're looking at the same data source on those phones. Again, whether it's any one of these technologies. And again, please just don't use email. Just don't, right? Because subject lines, where is it rendered? Can you really search it? How deep down into it do you need to go, right? Don't do that. But other things people can communicate effectively over, and they don't have to stare at each other to do so. Now, everyone's familiar with the Disney hand? Anyone not familiar with the Disney hand? Don't do that. A single pointed finger, and this is from Presentation Skills 101, implies blame. So you have to use two. That doesn't imply blame. That is the Disney hand, right? So I've honestly, have fun, take your kids to Disney World and see if you can get them to point at you with one finger, and then they'll freak out. It's kind of fun, right? But as I also like to call it, speak softly and carry metrics, right? I don't like what you're doing. Why? This is the reason why, right? Not, I don't really feel like you know what you're doing or you're handling those things. Finally, could you just put the advisor in? Right? Give him or her something to do. But again, more importantly, let that person start to work amongst the teams. And this is a job that you can grow for yourselves. That's the most, honestly, out of everything I've said, that's the most important thing on this. All of us are experienced security people. We all have a group that we came out of. We're all really good at something in this group. There's nothing stopping us from taking that and saying, I'm really good at this. I've got this tribal knowledge. Let me reach out and build some form of communication across the different teams. That then all of a sudden, my star goes up. And I can start showing that other teams are more effective. And I can become more tactical and sit beside the CISO. And start building a role for myself. And oh, by the way, metrics move things. Speak softly, carry metrics. Do you know who really cares about the metrics? The board. So if I can walk in and show how a decision that was made under my watch as a technical decision had a strategic impact, guess what? I get a lot more visibility. And everyone up the chain looks good. So advertise yourselves, build metrics, give yourself evidence, but try to talk a little bit better amongst the different teams. And somebody needs to become an advisor in this. I'm out of time. Any questions? Yeah. Actually, sorry, one more movie. Sorry? No. Scrooged. Question? I would like to believe that they could. They have not proven themselves capable of that to me so far. I'm sorry? I don't disagree with you. I just don't see it happening because everyone is still looking for something that's going to solve this problem. Especially in the US market, we're very much Pavlovian. Right? I ring the bell, I see an alert, I did something with the alert, or I made that alert not have to happen. We're responsive to that. So it drives that single point of focus rather than the consolidation that really is what we need to see. Yes, in the back.
Can you speak a bit more to the metrics that make sense to carry? Like how to qualify, quantify,
Sure.
and explore these metrics?
Sure. So it's a difficult question to answer because the metrics are going to be different everywhere else, right? But primarily what you're looking at is, especially when you're doing almost like a tool validation, if the tool says that part of the ROI is to reduce the number of events that you're going to see, how many events did I see before I put it in versus how many events did I see after I got it in? And more importantly, and you want to measure twice, if not 3 times. It's, and again, speaking from the vendor perspective, right? I've made a lot of money walking in and saying, I'm going to reduce this event flow. Easy, done, right? And then as soon as I leave, the people that are using it are not as experienced as I am, and the event rate goes back up. So you want to measure it again, right? And then you want to give it a little while, and you want to measure it a 3rd time, because you're going to hit peaks and valleys before you hit a steady state. So that's number 1, right? Just simple event rate. Also, IR cases. I would love to know the percentage of false positives that have been gathered off of IR cases. How many, and the hard part is a lot of people talk about measurements based on true positives. I don't really know how you make that determination of that metric myself. I can think about it some more. But I really want to see a percentage of false positives versus cases that aren't, right? Whether they're thrown out or whether they've been identified as true positives and moved forward into the case log. Simple SOC daily information, right? It's not necessarily who handled, and this is the fun part for me, especially when you talk about analytics. I'll beat on the target breach for a second. Everyone's familiar with the target breach. I don't feel like that's fairly old hat at this point in time, right? So we all look at technologies, again, from a metrics perspective and say, okay, it's gonna, and this is talking out of both sides of my mouth, but we look at technologies and say that this reduced my alert rate, or it's allowed me a little bit better visibility as it applies to risk or compliance. Great. But if we look at the target perspective, that would not have necessarily have saved them, right? They had the alerts, the data was there, just no one was able to actually understand how important that one particular event or one particular alert was, right? So when you start talking about your SOC daily logs or your other pieces, it's important not to get funneled directly down on who's closing the most cases or who's dealing with the most events or dealing with the most alerts. It's almost that middle curve of who's really trying to spend a little bit more time and maybe communicating with other groups a little bit better. So can we measure some of the cross communication? Can I look at it from a Slack perspective or from a Jive perspective or from some other archaic messaging capability, right? To say, okay, are these people talking cross teams around this particular event or this particular indicator or file name, or for the love of God, it's Betty in accounting again, right? If it's, because for example, we may look at Betty and say she's continually opening up these PDFs and we've put her through remedial spearfish training, I don't know how many times. Right? So we'll automatically kind of tend to ignore any alerts that have Betty's name associated to them. It's the boy cries wolf scenario, right? But you have to try to focus in a little bit more on that. And that's the fuzzy part of the metrics, is can I train that or look for someone that spends a little bit more time on something just to try to make sure that they're not missing something in general. Is that fair? Yes, sir. I can't believe I'm going to say this. Audit. I mean, yeah. You know, quite frankly, the group of people that are most used to walking in and understanding something very quickly and then being able to communicate or make references that are communicable to other people very fast. Right? That's the first group that I would go look at. Risk and compliance is also a little bit ahead of cybersecurity as it equates to some of this stuff. And I see a lot more movement of security intelligence. I really don't like the term threat intelligence, but intel being moved or pushed more into risk assessment, compliance, and also just kind of the overall security health of an organization. Any other questions? Yes? So that's a good one. And this is important. So I've got a new guy that just came onto my team. And he's a very good security guy. He's a very good architect. He's still working on some of his sales stuff, right? Ultimately, we're all salespeople, whether we want to admit it or not, right? We sold ourselves in relationships. We sold ourselves to the job when we did our interview, right? We sell ourselves to the telemarketers when we tell them to hang up very quickly, or we play with them for a little while and let them drone on into nothingness, right? So where I'm going with that is security people need to work on their bedside manner and explain things in simple ways, right? The metrics need to be fairly simple when you move them up the chain, right? It's not, we've seen Emotet 15 or 20 different times within my environment, something I dealt with a customer the other week, or that the black energy or not Petya or VPN filter or any of these other, that is, when you start talking up the chain, they don't get that. They don't understand that, right? But if I can walk through and say that, for example, we didn't have to re-image 45 machines last week because we got in front of that particular piece, that matters, right? If I can start talking about things in terms of FTEs, and understanding the man hours, right? That helps. So that we have to sell those ideas, sell those under things, and communicate simply. It's, you know, we don't want to get into the layer different pieces. Like I don't want to talk about a layer 1 versus a layer 7 versus a layer 8 versus a layer 3 versus the PCAP says this and I use this tool to do that. That's great for us, right? But in communicating higher, it doesn't matter. Yes. me say that one more time. Average to what? Average loss expectancy? Quite frankly, I think things like VDI killed it. And BYOD killed average loss expectancy, right? I mean, we write stuff off, or we look at, this thing has been depreciated over X period of time, and there's just a number that's affiliated to that one, and it's a commercialized throwaway. Sure. Sure, but right, and we, so security is insurance. I was talking about this with a guy earlier on today. Security absolutely is insurance, and I'm, to your point, and I think to the point of the talk as well is, okay, if you want to say things based on an average loss, great, but come with metrics, right? This happened last week, and this is how many hours or what we had to do to get around that, and this was the actual cost affiliated to that one. Now I can associate a baseline, and as I move forward, then I can say, hey, I was able to get in front of 5 of these. Guess what? You owe me $725,000. I mean, it's ultimately what you're talking about is the communication strategy upwards, so that it can be, so that the board or the CMO or the COO can actually understand it. At this point, what I really want people to get out of this is just, again, start talking. Like, those metrics and that understanding is exactly where I want to see things go. But first off, we need to have a better understanding of being able to identify when that was this particular type of incident. And we do want to capture those metrics. And how do we get that data and then react tactically before we can start taking a more strategic response and getting more of those budgets? Or chargebacks is the other fancy term for it. Any other questions?
Question up top.
There's a big blaring light.
That's fine, look to the light, I'll be loud. How does our Wall Street culture, with a need to continually improve, yielding a need to constantly reorganize despite positive metrics, play into your theory?
So, for those that didn't, I think everyone heard the question. I don't need to repeat it. Good. All right. It's a good question. I mean, the problem is security tools, security vendors are driven by the Wall Street piece, where we have to try to drive numbers, and we're looking to consistently replace someone based upon a nit. That's just the nature of the beast. So I think your best bet, and this is a long-term play, is, again, it's the metrics. Hey, we did do that replacement, and we saved, $20,000 when we actually go back and look at it. Can we try something different next time? All right, there's no short-term numbers I can give you or metrics or ideas that would say I'm going to disrupt that cycle, but you can start building towards that, and again, trying to build some of that visibility and some of that information so you can become more tactical and more of a trusted advisor to the CISO, and from there maybe be able to talk a little higher and prove that I don't need you to spend $750,000 on that next fancy new whiz-bang budget, even though we have to show some form of improvement. What if we did more of a process-based work this year? Like, let's take a day off. Let's take a year off from buying something new. It's funny to me, I constantly run into situations of, the problem wasn't the tool. It was the policy, or it was the process, or it was the procedure. Has anyone in here ever worked on a merger and acquisition with networks? Right? How many times have you figured out that the network diagram didn't really reflect what the network actually looked like? Every single time, right? How many times have you seen something that you were expected to see the alert and you didn't, and it's because the route didn't actually go through the inspection device that you thought it was going to go through? Right? Happens all the time. So trying to be able to prove some of those things potentially would help disrupt that buying cycle. On buying the next level of whiz bang, won't solve the core problem that the network doesn't actually run through where it was going to go in the first place. Right? It's a level of visibility we have to get, but it's a social and basically an architectural visibility, not necessarily a packet or a risk or a patch or a systems level visibility. We've got plenty of those things, right? Does that make sense, or is that?
Yeah, or despite history, we tried the same thing over and over again, just 10 years apart, because we didn't learn from our lesson the first time.
Yeah. I mean, are we really going to fight NGFW? Really?
I work for your former employer, but I'll fight it all day long.
right. We throw NG in front of it, and all of a sudden it's brand new, and we have to have it. Great. Right. I mean, but I think that's the point, right? I mean, it is the definition of insanity. Any other questions? I think I am finished. I might have run a little long. I apologize. Thanks, guys. I remember these. Yeah, I'll take this.
All right, so at this point we are going to break for a little while. We've got a couple more talks coming up before Hacker Jeopardy. The next talk starts at 5:55. So take this time to go out and collect your Bitcoins before Hacker Jeopardy. And of course, like I said, after Hacker Jeopardy is when we're going to do the silent auction. And I think they might be doing the raffles during the break. I'm not sure, the vendor raffles, that is, but they've already drawn from cards. Or hang out in here and we'll do some more trivia shortly.